The right is forming a new ideology today, and I see that I'm like one of 5 people who could steer this process to be something better.
And in the right hands, it has all the chances of shifting the discourse that occurs on the right today. We live in vibrant times indeed, in times when for the first time in history, progress could be defined by those who happen to be on the right, by those who change and modify the environment as opposed to the environment conserving its present modes of being. The movement of history was never defined by tyranny, degeneracy, or similar malice. Such malice usually defined an empire in decline or a primitive society. But the organizing principles which do bring about progress are the organizational principles of optimization that result in a perpetual change of better organizational design emerging out of variance relative to the environment. Thus, there emerges a need of organizing principles that uphold liberty of variation in combination with verticality and knowledge of what to select, and that is something that our enemies lack. We are the organization and society is the environment. Hello, this is a response video to Whatifalthist's Manifesto for the New Right, whose central purpose is to provide for a
message men are willing to die for as the world gets darker.
He starts out by laying a somewhat mystical theory of evolution, only to then correctly branch out into something scientific.
God is evolution. That is the underlying principle which drives this thesis. Instead, I'm just going to use the word providence to signify what I mean by God. There is clearly an order to the universe. There are natural laws that operate across the universe and existence. Things like gravity, Darwinistic competition, duality, the mixing of the sexes, or entropy. We take these underlying rules of the universe for granted in our society, yet we don't think about why they exist or not. The universe is a game in which there are clear, immutable rules, yet we ignore them. People are rewarded for following those rules or not. The societies which follow those principles succeed and continue to propagate, and those who do not collapse. This is the history-long process of the rise and fall of empires, or decadence.
Clever, for evolution and subsequently progressive evolution is definitely the strongest idea that the right has in its arsenal, for not only is it scientific, but it advocates for hierarchy and contains the monopoly for historical development that could rationalize a right-wing rule post hoc, much like the present left rationalizes its own power using appeals to progress. But unfortunately Rudyard or Rudy does not talk about this enough, instead suggesting that society must be organized in accordance with natural laws from which an optimal strategy of development should be derived.
Their role is to figure out what rules to follow, and if they do so correctly, they will succeed and propagate. The West Europeans figured out the scientific method, which happens to relate to objective reality very well, which then let them conquer the world. What this effectively means is that every generation is a challenge by providence against everyone else playing the game.
He resurrects the Spencerian idea of the social organism in relation to progressive evolution, by which
different cultures play different roles for the conditions they evolved under. The thing is that all of these organisms, and societies are fundamentally organisms, are pitted in permanent Darwinistic competition with the other.
In the Spencerian and perhaps Bogdanovian technological fashion, he also makes the case for the removal of the dead weight of the social organism, which otherwise must be organized on voluntary basis, thereby mirroring the dynamics we see on the market economy.
This also involves the weakening or removal of organizations which are not based upon individual responsibility, like bureaucracies. Everything should be made to compete with everything else for survival. Organizations that don't do this always grow, bloat, become leeches on society that try to consume the organizations that are competitive. Furthermore, as much of society as possible should be based upon reciprocal relationships done for mutual benefit, rather than forcing people to do things through physical strength or motivating them through false lies.
All of these points that he brings forward in the video are my speciality, and I'm glad that more people on the right begin seeing the world in evolutionary dynamics. That is, they are attempting to locate the most effective laws of development of every organization that would allow it to outcompete others, which inevitably branches out to prescriptions on how a society or a social organism must be run. If they want to stay alive, that is. We may move ahead in time, yet we may become less progressive over time and find ourselves in a collapse, and as I will later argue, this is where we're headed towards, just like the previous empires, peoples, and civilizations who were before us. In the third part of the Manifesto, Rudy lays down the central foundational principles in accordance to which we should redesign our society, after suggesting that in order to do that, a certain level of consciousness is required. The structure somewhat mirrors my old right-wing progressivism video, but some of the content differs in both form and substance. For instance, my video did not have weird takes such as this one.
The government or the powerful will soon have the ability to genetically engineer the populace to be cattle, to monitor them every day with AI or cameras, to use military technology to kill dissenters.
You will eat the bugs.
Eating insects could help fight world hunger. From caterpillars and cockroaches to mealworm-covered apples.
You will live in the pot.
Putting 10 what we call pedestrians into the space. There's no privacy. As you see, there's no curtain, there's no wall.
You will wear the mask. You will get the vaccine.
We'll convert your children.
You will watch the Hollywood movies. You will consume the product. Don't ask questions. Get excited for next product. You will have no privacy. You will own nothing. And you will be happy.
My goal is to create a society where people are constantly improving their subconscious and developing them with groups. Perhaps using psychedelics like ayahuasca, the hemisync methods developed by the Monroe Institute, or anything else that works that can help get us in touch with our subconscious or the spirit world, whatever you want to call it, so that we can share our discoveries to learn more about ourselves and the world. To put a focus upon the human experience and what the subjective experience of life is as a person.
Because democracy basically means government
and did not converge with religious mysticism as well as dualism, but let's hear what these foundational principles are, and they are precisely honor, truth, and freedom. Now, personally, I don't think that they form a proper dialectic, but I'm not going to bother debating it in this video, though as you could imagine, honor culture is more prominent among primitive people than our own, while wokeism and identity politics could also be classified as forms of honor culture in their own respective right. I will publish my thoughts on the other three elements that I think should shape our politics in the forthcoming section inside the political chapter of my manifesto, which is presently 91% finished. Yes, I know, I promised to release it last year, then in February, to then postpone it to April, but hey, I'm a busy fellow. Try working 11 hours a day yourself while doing research and self-maintenance. So put yourself into my shoes for a moment before you bitch about my uploading schedule. Anyways, here's my take on all of this. While the video had a lot of esoteric and mystical things like duality or opposites, which frankly do not even exist outside of our imagination, the video had a good message behind it. That is, to escape the rise and fall cycles and instead become the masters of our own destinies, and that would bring us closer to progress, or God as he likes to say it. Yes, he equates the two. The central problem with the video, however, as with any other philosophical video, is a lack of coherent prescriptions on how society must be transformed in order to fit in this vision. Should we reform our political system? If so, then how? Should we reform our economy? Should we reconstruct what constitutes a civic society or a nation? And most importantly, how do we acquire power in a hostile environment? There are no answers to that, besides maybe we need to decentralize power, and technology may or may not help us with that. Very confusing, and the partial reason for why there are no concrete answers or proposals is because Rudy operates within a liberal individualistic dialectic in which he imagines that for as long as individuals voluntarily adopt his organizational principles, a society can be saved. But why would they? What is going to be the incentive mechanism by which they would adopt these organizational principles? How are we going to indoctrinate an already indoctrinated mass with these organizational principles as opposed to the organizational principles of independence from conservative values, equality, and power grab, which seem to be currently the most prominent ones? He is silent on this regard, but in accordance to the law of parsimony, the easier is the principle to follow, the more it will be followed. And besides, why would certain demographics subscribe to the ideology that would undermine their own power and lifestyle? His or any other idea on the right, including my own, is thereby stopped by a solid wall of power which operates both as an element of its own and also as an organizing principle, and in order for his or mine principles of organization to go mainstream, just like every other organization in the world, they must pass a test of selection by the environment. Let me quote you a passage from my favorite book, Martin Eden, that I want you to listen before I make a broader argument.
The chief qualification of 99% of all editors is failure. They have failed as writers. They have tried to write, and they have failed. And right there is the cursed paradox of it. Every portal to success in literature is guarded by those watchdogs, the failures in literature. The editors, sub-editors, associate editors, most of them, and the manuscript readers for the magazines and book publishers, most of them, nearly all of them, are men who wanted to write and who have failed. And yet they, of all creatures under the sun the most unfit, are the very creatures who decide what shall and what shall not find its way into print. They who have proved themselves not original, who have demonstrated that they lack the divine fire, sit in judgment upon originality and genius. And after them come the reviewers, just so many more failures. Don't tell me that they have not dreamed the dream and attempted to write poetry or fiction, for they have, and they have failed.
Ruth's mind was quick, and her disapproval of her lover's views was buttressed by the contradiction she found in his contention. But Martin, if that be so, if all the doors are closed, as you have shown so conclusively, how is it possible that any of the great writers ever arrived?
They arrived by achieving the impossible, he answered. They did such blazing glorious work as to burn to ashes those that opposed them. They arrived by course of miracle, by winning 1,000-to-1 wager against them. They arrived because they were Carlyle's battle-scarred giants who will not be kept down. And that is what I must do. I must achieve the impossible.
The sad reality is that we as writers live in a hostile environment due to our lack of power that would allow us to be in the editing position. Selecting a right-wing ideology that contains a conservative definition of honor as one of its central organizing principles is going to be pretty tough, practically impossible, unless it is accompanied by an extreme force, which is unlikely to ever be the case, or its content and form changes in a manner that would make it vertically selected by the environment. Another problem is that neither honor, freedom, or truth happen to be original. These are old principles, they aren't an innovation in any meaningful sense, and while two of these organizing principles, being truth and freedom, are quite essential in the sphere of the economy and technology, they clearly aren't as good in resisting subversion in the realm of politics, as evidenced by the polling data gathered from our elites who like neither freedom or truth. No matter how much conservatives wish to go back to the older organizational forms of being, just like an antiquated forms of technology, it won't be selected by the environment. Why are you giving me a keypad phone when I have a touchscreen? and therefore we need something new and better in order for our vision to proliferate across the masses. We don't have to depart from either of these principles, they could be integrated into something broader, but they must not come alone or in combination with therapy sessions, or consciousness being defined as some sort of a state of union with the biosphere. It's too general and completely unideological, thereby completely meaningless and useless. A consciousness is the theory of evolution, of conflict, an ideology, not some weird state of harmony with all living things. What are we, some sort of hippies? No. A consciousness is a form of awareness of the world in a way that furthers a particular ideology, such as progressivism.
Treat this as a stepping stone towards right-wing organizing that is based upon a theoretical conception, empirical evidence, a clear vision, and a supporting theory of history that will equate the right wing to progress itself without compromising on our core values.
I am presently working on both a theory of consciousness and praxis, whose early draft you can see in this almost 2-year-old video, though I must admit I have greatly advanced beyond it as to render much of what was said there theoretically antiquated for my old video has not been underpinned by a proper synthesis of the evolutionary dynamics combined with the general systems theory. And whether you will agree with it or disagree, it contains a primitive form of consciousness nonetheless. Progressive dialectic does not emerge out of combining the opposites. That's a low-level understanding of reality. Difference does not mean opposition. A meteor can travel in space until infinity, or in the case in which it eventually merges with another body mass, the impact will correspond to the combined speed and size of both bodies, but the force of the impact will not be equal on either parties. There won't ever be an opposite reaction, much like a chemical solution is not achieved by an equal mix of elements, nor are men and women opposites. They are just different. Difference does not mean opposition, and there are just two states of matter in the world, being and unbeing. The complexity which accompanies being will of course differ, but there is no natural opposite force to everything in the way that we humans perceive it. Change is driven out of a need of becoming. Assuming opposites indeed existed, they would always neutralize each other when combined, much like an equation, but different yet integratable components do produce a synthesis that is on a higher level, that is above its elements, a form of symbiosis that is greater than the sum of its components, such as a toothbrush, a plant, a child, a melody, a theory of special relativity, a classroom, and Big Mac were all assembled by a combination of differentiated elements that could be integrated with one another in a progressive dialectic. So if we wish to construct a better ideology, it must be made in line with the fundamentals of dialectical progress. That is to say, A, it must constitute an improvement to the previous state of being, and B, it must result out of symbiosis. So the goal is to create something higher than the present or past state of being that would synergize itself with power. Very shortly, I will release a progressive right-wing political manifesto combined with the concrete technocratic political form of government which it advocates for, and if you're going to make the claim that some other idea will meet these two conditions much better than right-wing progressivism, you better make a very strong case for your argument. That's all for tonight. I know I was supposed to talk about Rudy more than chill for my own ideology, but hey, I wouldn't do it if I didn't think it was the proper one. You can visit my Substack where you can read a few excerpts from the upcoming manifesto, which is absolutely for free, and stay tuned for a new right-wing progressivism video. And finally, thanks for staying with me and witnessing my intellectual evolution.